Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. With a ruling expected soon on a case before the International Court of Arbitration and the recent Pentagon report to the U.S. Congress on China's military development, tensions in the area of the South China Sea continue to take focus. What current developments are affecting countries in the region? Are different points of view becoming any less entrenched? And how are differences between the United States and China being managed by both sides? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Harvey Zordin, columnist for China Daily, and Ran Zongze, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
Staying neutral. The US has long maintained that it is neutral when it comes to territorial disputes. China is one claimant, while Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei are among the other claimants. The US Secretary of State reiterated this stance in January.
Let me emphasize again, the United States does not take sides on the sovereignty questions underlying the territorial disputes. We ask that all parties clarify their claims under international law, that they exercise restraint, and that they adhere to peaceful and diplomatic ways of addressing disagreements.
But as part of Washington's pivot to Asia, the US has reinvigorated a security alliance with the Philippines and is helping it modernize its navy. It's also rotating more ships to Singapore and Marines to Australia, as well as inking new defense guidelines with its ally Japan, which could see joint patrols in the South China Sea. Manila's current arbitration case was drawn up and is being argued by US attorneys Paul Reichler and Bernard Oxman, along with two professors from the UK. In December 2014, the US State Department issued a 26-page memorandum concluding that unless China revised its claim, it's not in accordance with the law of the sea. Senior American officials have claimed that the US will strive to uphold the rule of law in the South China Sea. And this April, the US also urged ASEAN unity on the ruling. So how is China responding?
The Philippines stubbornly initiated and forced forward South China Sea arbitration case, and such action is unlawful, unfaithful and unreasonable. It is interesting that the US cannot stop talking about the arbitration case and UNCLOS. If the US really wants to uphold order and stability in the South China Sea, why hasn't it joined the UNCLOS yet?
The US is accusing China of militarization in the South China Sea, while it has repeatedly sent military vessels and aircraft on surveillance missions, which China sees as acts of provocation. Beijing hopes Washington will honor its commitment of not taking sides on the South China Sea issue. The arbitration case could perhaps be a good place for the US to start.
Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Let's look at a philosophical issue. Do you think the current maritime disputes in the South China Sea are spinning out of control for the most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century between the United States and China? Or is it just a focus of the media, period?
Well, certainly it's one of the issues, but I don't frame it as the biggest challenge or the biggest issue between China and the United States. Between China and the United States, we have far more important things to do. We have numerous agendas. However, because media is very much focused on the South China Sea issue, and it is increasingly become very important in the hot spot, be very honest. I think one of the reasons it appears that America's deeply involvement and make it very hot issues between China and the United States.
What's your take?
My take is that it's not one or the other, but somewhere in between. It's a very important issue, but I think that we have institutional means of addressing these issues so they don't boil over. And for instance, we have the strategic dialogue between our two countries and other dialogues, military to military communications, and so on, that allow us to address these issues before they become too serious.
Maybe cybersecurity should come across as the overriding concern for both sides instead of the maritime disputes. But if we look at the issue in the broader context of the U.S. back to Asia or pivot to Asia strategy, then it may be a big issue. Do you think this is yet another philosophical point of view?
Well, absolutely. This issue has been brought up heavily by American side because it tried to justify its so-called pivot to Asia or rebalance to Asia. Ever since this kind of policy has been introduced, we have seen the increasing escalation or the tension in the region. And before that sort of policy has been introduced back in 2010, South China Sea and this region has been maintained quite relatively stable, peaceful, and everybody is very focused on how to develop their economy, how to integrate their economy with each other. And so the economy has been the number one issues before, given the fact that we have a relatively stable South China Sea.
Harvey, a ruling on the case filed by Manila before the International Court of Arbitration in The Hague on its dispute over the territory with Beijing is expected within a few weeks.
Correct.
But China has reiterated that it will not participate or accept the unilaterally initiated process. What do you think of the consequences arising of China's position of defiance?
Well, I think this arbitration which China has rejected puts China in a very difficult place, in fact, a no-win place, because even if China were to win every point in the arbitration, which most people say that it won't, China, by not agreeing to submit itself to the jurisdiction of this arbitration, looks like it's kind of a bully, and looks like it's not taking part in the international political system. China is a very important and powerful country now, but to cherry pick which agreements it's going to be part of and which it's not, I don't think it looks very good for China.
Look, this is a typical American position, and indeed that's shared by its allies in the South China Sea, particularly claimant we should be part of the arbitration. We should accept it anyway, otherwise China would look stupid. What do you think of it?
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. I'll put it that way. Americans now are very happy that they're talking a lot more and more about international law and rules. However, well, in South China Sea, America so far hasn't ratified or joined the UNCLOS. So that put America in a very awkward position. Whenever it's want to cite the article and the rules of the UNCLOS, however, America is not part of this game. So I think for China, it's the Chinese government to make it crystal clear. China of course will reject any kind of arbitration under international law, under the articles of the UNCLOS, because this tribunal will have no jurisdiction on the territorial claims or disputes. In addition, China made a statement that it will not going to participate or recognize during any kind of maritime border delimitation. So from both cases, China just exercised its own rights. So I think China got a very strong point.
What do you think of his rebuttal?
I don't think the arbitration tribunal is a puppet of the United States, and the judges unanimously found that the tribunal has jurisdiction to resolve this dispute, and China not participating in this, I think, looks bad and it's wrong.
I wonder if you know the story behind the scenario. The Philippine authorities have hired a very senior, very expensive American lawyer. And if you say the United States is not part of the game, well, it could be a dual-track game, right? The government may keep a distance on the surface from the case itself, but lawyers who are paid, of course, very well by Manila. By the way, its economy is not very good, but it spends so much money hiring such a senior American lawyer, pushing for the case of international arbitration. What do you think of this story? Well, the American penetration into the game in its own way, very interesting way.
It is an open secret. America is working very hard behind the scene. So it is not just the Philippines looks like a puppet, actually, orchestrated by Americans, and not only lawyers but also some finance support and many other issues. Let me also put it this way. I think this arbitration and that also has its flaw, because Javier just mentioned about, they said that recognize they may have a jurisdiction. However, we very strongly disagree with that, because the core of this arbitration actually is about the territorial disputes, which go far beyond the jurisdiction of UNCLOS. Secondly, even with regard to the maritime boundary delimitations, China has made, under the article of UNCLOS, we made a statement. We're not going to participate that. So this kind of, let me put it this way, the compulsory arbitration is unlawful. So we very strongly insist that this argument, no matter how you want to justify that sort of arbitration, and we're not going to change. And no matter what kind of outcome, or no matter what kind of ruling, it will come out. It will not going to change China's position on that, and it will not going to change or undermine China's sovereignty over the Nansen Islands.
Harvey?
Unless China wins all the points of the arbitration, which I don't think that it will, China will lose in the court of public opinion. So yes, law matters, but public opinion matters as well. And it looks like China is cherry-picking which mechanisms it's going to use for dispute resolution. And I think no matter what happens, China's going to come out a loser on this.
Well, he's very pessimistic about the outcome. What do you think?
No, let me put
China is going to be a loser?
Maybe in public opinions, if that is the price going to pay, I think I will be ready for that, because we're not going to undermine our sovereignty on the Nansen Islands. So you can compare which is...
By the way, Mr. Wang Yi, our foreign minister, has been visiting different countries before the release of the outcome of the international arbitration in The Hague on South China Sea. Up to 40 countries explicitly said they are behind China in supporting our position.
Then there will be much more. More to come.
Why are you so confident?
Yeah, well, absolutely, because we're on the right side of the history. And let me put it this way, even you're talking about the public opinions, not at this moment it's about 40, and I'm sure there will be much more countries that come to voice their support on China's stance, its position, on how to handle this issue. And
what do you think of the issue of having possible solidarity, absolute solidarity within ASEAN itself? Do you think ASEAN comes across as a single voice on the issue? Do you think ASEAN utterly and warmly welcomes the intervention from the United States militarily so that the issue can be easily solved?
No, I think ASEAN would like to play a larger role in this problem or dispute. But 3 of the countries of ASEAN have decided that they want to solve these problems bilaterally. And ASEAN requires absolute unanimity. And as a consequence, ASEAN doesn't seem to be very powerful in this case.
Even the guy who won the presidential race in the Philippines has made it clear that it wants to have a direct dialogue with Beijing on the maritime dispute. So what do you think of the chance for the two sides to find a peaceful solution and to really achieve a breakthrough, to break up the current stalemate?
Let me put it in this way, 2 parts. The first part, the current jurisdiction, the current arbitration is unlawful, unreasonable. China will going to reject whatever the outcome. However, we're still ready and we're open to any kind of possible talk with the future Manila government and the presidential candidate. Or now it has been elected, Mr. Duterte, and he voiced his position. Maybe he like to seek a bilateral talk. I think that will be the right approach to address the problem. And furthermore, let me put it this way: China, we border so many neighbors. We border with 14 net neighbors. Through the bilateral talk and consultation in the past few decades, we have signed border treaties with 12 out of 14. And even more, about the maritime boundary delimitation, we have a successful story. We signed the treaty with Vietnam, which now is one of the claimants of the South China Sea. So no matter in border dispute settlement and also the maritime border dispute settlement, we have a successful story. That serves a very powerful argument for China.
You are one step short of mentioning directly our successful solution to the Tonting Bay or the Beibuan
that's what I'm
between
mentioning
Vietnam
about,
and China. But you are watching dialogue, which is a very interesting debate between Harvey and Zhongze. We are talking about why the United States and China tend to have a kind of a tipping point in the South China Sea, which is described by the media extensively, particularly Western media, as one of the biggest obstacles to the U.S.-China relationship. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S., insists that freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea has been seriously endangered with the increasing presence of China, citing the case of land reclamation as an example to illustrate the dangers that China deliberately imposes on the others. They also pointed out that China tries somehow to use force to redraw the borders. Well, that's a very serious accusation. At the same time, China says Vietnam and the Philippines have also been doing their land reclamation. And we are happy to see that the latest development shows the U.S. also warns Vietnam against their land reclamation, so that the U.S. as a kind of arbitrator, though China does not accept this as an arbitrator, could level the playing field. What do you think of this proactive effort by the U.S. To ease the tensions in the South China Sea? Or do you think, ironically, the U.S. is the guy who causes all the tensions here?
No, as a matter of fact, the Americans' so-called freedom of navigation, it is used as an instrument to penetrate into the closing maneuver of China's islands. Well, that has been very dangerous, and because it poses a threat to China's sovereignty and security, reject and oppose that. And in the same time, America has been single out China as, for example, as you mentioned, in the land reclamation, and turn a blind eye for either Manila or Hanoi, and that has been unconvincing. And having said this, I will say that freedom of navigation is not a problem. I never heard any kind of single incident which caused by...
And in fact, the American military vessels have conducted some innocent passages, right? Without causing any disputes, without causing any serious conflicts.
No, we have different view with American friends, American colleagues.
On what?
On the so-called passage of innocent,
okay.
Passage of innocent. Yeah, we do have different. And according to international law, there is some area which they can have their own interpretation. However, the coastal state like China, we have our own law and regulations. We ask that the foreign, particularly the military ships or the aircraft, they should submit the report beforehand or ask the consent. However, Americans said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's the part of our freedom of navigation. So we do have very different view, conflicting view on that.
Well, the low tide reefs, right? This is the special phrase used by UNCLOS to characterize the features there. Now, the distinction between islands and rocks is important for the South China Sea in international law. Owners of the islands are entitled to an exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles. Rocks do not receive the same designation. With this in mind, Vietnam and the Philippines have raced to develop contested rocks, coral reefs and sandbags, turning them into islands through dredging and military fortification. But the U.S. claims that no country has built as feverishly as China. Is that a fair claim?
As I read Article 60 of UNCLOS, referring to that great maritime expert, Gertrude Stein, a stone is a stone is a stone, and a rock is a rock is a rock. And just because somebody builds on a rock doesn't make it an island. So UNCLOS is very clear under Article 60 that a rock does not get more than 500-meter safety zone. They don't get the exclusive economic zone, and they don't get the 12-mile territorial sea. So I think the building by China and the other countries is irrelevant to UNCLOS. And what really has to be, this is one of the nubs of the issue, what has to be decided is where are these maritime borders and what is exactly what. And until that's decided, China takes the position that historically it's had possession of these land features for thousands of years, and the other countries have their precedents. But this is not yet to be decided, and I think that's the nub of the argument here.
Having done the land reclamation, China does not extend or enlarge any kind of claimant, not at all. China just want to consolidate to make sure what we have, no more, no less. I think that's pretty clear because it is apparent that that Lansa Island has been China's territory for thousands of years since it's an inherent territory. Of course, now, the core issue of the South China Sea actually is twofold. One is the territorial dispute. The other is the maritime border delimitation because of the introduction of the UNCLOS. However, the territorial disputes should dominate all the issues unless you have the territorial issue solved. So you can have the second step, how to make a maritime boundary delimitation. So these two are related with each other.
But I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and this is very important because $5 trillion worth of goods pass through the South China Sea. And beyond that, if we're talking about exclusive economic zone, that whole area, the seabed, has untold riches. So I think there's a lot more work to be done here to solve these disputes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that there's numerous commercial ships passing every year. Actually, it's over 10,000, 100,000 commercial ships pass every year. So even given such a large amount of commercial passages, there's no single incident caused because of the freedom of navigation. So
well,
that is one thing. The other thing is, in the past, before Americans so-called rebalance to Asia, pivot to Asia, this South China Sea area has been very stable, very peaceful, and this stable and peaceful has been maintained or kept by China and ASEAN countries, not other countries. But now it seems Americans try to demonstrate or try to attempt to show the rest of the world, I'm the safeguarder. I provide to the public goods of safety in the South China Sea. So this is not the right approach.
Well, I think if I can use a baseball analogy, under Barack Obama, America's played softball in international relations. But I think whether Hillary Clinton gets in or Donald Trump, it's going to be no more Mr. Nice Guy or Miss Nice Guy. I think these disputes are going to be ratcheted up. So I hope that in the intervening few months that we can come to some agreements to resolve some of these really knotty problems.
The American media, along with other Western media players, almost dominated the flow of information across traditional borders these days. Everybody knows this. It's an open secret. Recently, Fox News reported that an exclusive satellite image it acquired shows the Chinese military has deployed new fighter jets to Yongxing Island in the South China Sea and has reinforced its advanced surface-to-air missile system there too. Now, Yongxing seems to not be in dispute for years. Why did it surface now at this moment?
So that's
by the way, and Harvey as well, do you think Vietnam and the Philippines have never done anything to militarize the rocks and the islands they have occupied? Why China is singled out as the bad guy?
Well, I don't think three wrongs make a right. But yes, it is a little curious. But I think all these matters are coming to a head. We had a lot of ambiguity before. And one of the changes, the big change in my view, is China's gone from a paper tiger to a tiger. And being a tiger, China can much more assert itself militarily and politically. And I think that's why now things are coming to a head.
Well, let me remind you what happened 1.5 centuries ago, perhaps even longer. China was a tiger without teeth. That's why China was invaded by Europeans and the Yuanming Garden was looted, right? So this sense of history has alerted China to the fact that without a strong military to back up our sovereignty claims, China will be bullied. Is that the view shared by scholars as well?
Thank you very much to brought
Because
up
he's talking
this,
about the tiger. I mean, is China a tiger or a dragon? or a panda, giant panda, kung fu panda?
Tiger, yeah. I think for China, I think one of the points we should take a second look. One of the very conventional narratives mention if China becomes stronger and it could become more dangerous. That is exactly wrong. When China becomes stronger, then the international community has a stronger force for safeguarding the peace and stability. Look at the recent years, how China has been working with Americans, working with other Europeans, working with other stakeholders to tackle those problems. Not only the traditional security threat, but also transnational threat.
Such as the process of denuclearization in North Korea and in Iran.
China can be
perhaps.
a benign and a positive contribution in addressing those problems. So don't just frame China become a bigger or stronger, or don't just create a scary story when China.
There's no question that what you're saying is correct, and you look at another example is the anti-piracy efforts that China's participated in. But I go back to what I said before. It looks to me that China's cherry-picking which international vehicles it's going to use and which it's not going to use, and I think that looks bad for one of the most powerful nations on Earth now, not to be a full participating member of international communities and treaties.
Well, China has been, in the last over 30 plus years, has made tremendous efforts to integrate itself, to join in signing the treaties, to join in international organizations. But very unfortunate at this moment, one of the very important UNCLOS, we are talking about South China Sea, which is the main, one of the main international organ to govern the maritime issue. America is not part of this.
I knew you were going to mention that.
Yeah, that's right. So you'd better be part of this, then you can make a more convincing argument.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I don't think we have enough time to clarify whether the U.S. is in a legal position to intervene, even militarily. I'll see you next time, I promise, about the same issue. Until then, goodbye.